Before we get started, we got to talk to you about something. Well, it's not a secret. It's what's near and dear to our hearts. It is that love of the moving image. It is the love of film. It is the love of cinema and watching as much of it as we possibly can from all the corners of the world. Because I mean, really, that's kind of what we're here for as film fans and film lovers and film goers and film experiencers, as it were, which means that well, I got to recommend something to you because there is a streaming service that I personally love. I think it's one of the better ones out there, especially if you're looking for some cinema that maybe is a little off the beaten track, but it's got a that maybe some you want some world cinema, you want some documentaries, you want sort of a wide variety of stuff that you wouldn't necessarily get anywhere else. And you know what? It's all in one place. It's all at filmmovementplus.com, which, at least from my perspective, is probably one of the better streaming services out there for film lovers. And this month in July, they've got a lot of really interesting stuff. They have new stuff coming every week, and again, it's one of those services that I can't recommend enough because they had one that just launched called Volcano, which is a really sort of interesting sort of family story that goes back and forth. It's set in the Ukraine, and it was a festival favorite all across the world. And it's a film that you're not gonna see in most places, but when you sit down and you experience it, it's a special thing. And there's films like well, there's actually some Olympic films coming up on the service in the next couple of weeks, sort of in time with the Summer Olympics starting up. And it's a film called Over the Limit. It's a documentary just about how the Russian system for training athletes will kind of push boundaries and sort of, I don't know, stretch the rules and really take things to some really sort of extremes. It's one of those modern sports docs that really is akin to something like a 30 for 30 or something you would see on ESPN, and it's really a fantastic sort of look inside uh, the Olympic system and sort of its beauty, but also its corruption at the same time. It's a great look, and it's starting on Film Movement Plus later this month. But there's that. There's a whole bunch of other stuff. There's a 4K restoration of one of the best Mexican films of all time called Espaldas Mojados, aka Wetbacks. Again, if you want to check out some Mexican cinema, and I mean, again, even as a fan, I did not know how rich the Mexican cinema scene really is. And I mean, there is so much out there just to really experience and watch, and there's some great stuff. There's also the premiere of a really fun film that played at Cannes a little while back called Caro Diario, which Film Movement has on DVD and Blu-ray as well if you want to pick that up. But again, it's a self-reflective comedy that's a lot of fun, and there's just, again, there is such a wide-ranging variety of interesting foreign stuff, documentary, sports documentaries. There's a boxing documentary as well in correlation with the Summer Olympics called Hands of God, which is coming to the service soon as well. Which again, I've seen, and it's fantastic. But it's one of those things where if you love film, I really think you should check out FilmMovementPlus.com. And because you're a listener of the show and you love film just as much as we do, we've got something special for you, because when you go to filmmovementplus.com and sign up for a scant $5.99, which is basically the price of a coffee, well, a fully loaded coffee anyway over at Starbucks, but not only do you get free 30 days to try it out, but if you sign up with the promo code SEATS, you get 50% off for the first 3 months after that, which really it's a steal. If you love cinema and you want to check out some really interesting foreign cinema from all across the world, not only here, but from basically any country you can think of, sign up, go to filmmovementplus.com for a scant $5.99, and please enjoy it. Now playing in a world where we're not sure if we want to go back to the theaters. To kick it off, Sarah, thank you so much for coming on. I mean, you are a valued contributor over at In the Seats, but you were working so many other places as well. Can you just tell the people who you are and sort of where they can find your stuff?
thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I am a feminist writer and podcaster. You can find my writing various places. I've written for Yahoo Style, Refinery 29, The Washington Post, Addicted Magazine, She Does the City, and a bunch of other places that I love. I also have a forthcoming podcast from Frequency. It's called The Reheat. I co host it with Siddharth Hassan, who is a fantastic entertainment reporter. And in this podcast, what we do is we re examine old scandals from 10, 20, 30 years ago and put them under the microscope. We examine essentially how we would react to them if they happened today. So it is a contemporary look at historic scandals.
I love it. So like the Lindbergh baby now, or that kind of thing, or like is it all pop culture, or is it sort of other stuff as well?
It's mostly pop culture. So things like Angelina Jolie versus Jennifer Aniston,
Oh, okay,
that
all right.
rivalry that was created in the media because of the love triangle with Brad Pitt, or Bennifer 1.0. We know at the moment it's Bennifer 2.0, but we're going to be doing an episode on the first installment of Bennifer, what happened in the 2000s when they started dating. So it's a lot of fun stuff, but we go pretty deep. We talk about how it was all covered in the media. We talk about sociology, but we also definitely talk about the dirt. So if that's what you want to hear, don't worry. It's entertaining. Trust me.
You know what? I'm already hooked. I can't wait to listen. But I mean, just to kick off why we're here today, I mean, as just sort of an adjunct of In the Seats with, we're calling this the Critics Corner, where I sit down with fellow contributors and fellow critics, and just we either talk about something that maybe you missed that's going to be on that's on one of the major streaming services right now, or something you think people should see that's on one of the major streaming services right now, because we're opening up again and things are starting to ramp up, but at the same time there's still plenty of stuff out there you got to watch. And like it's so easy for stuff to fly under the radar. And the film that you picked was Wild Mountain Thyme, which is
Mm-hmm.
available on Amazon Prime now, and it's with Emily Blunt and James Dornan. And I'm kind of curious, why this film? What was it about this one that made you want to do it?
I think it's a fascinating case study in how hard it is to adapt plays for the screen. So, Wild Mountain Thyme is based on a play that I think you pronounce it outside Mullingar. It's based on a play that takes place in Ireland, um, and it's written by John Patrick Shanley, who actually wrote Wild Mountain Thyme. He adapted it for the screen, and he is a pretty accomplished playwright. And in 2014, when it premiered on Broadway, it was acclaimed. People said it was his best work since Doubt. I'm not kidding you. They compared the stage version to Doubt favorably. But then when the movie came out, it was really maligned. And one of the things that I think happened that went wrong is that it's very talky. There aren't a lot of characters. So while it is a feel good movie, that's I think the tone of the movie. It's really difficult to do that. I think on the screen and have it be almost a two-hander. Like it's kind of almost a two-hander between Jamie Dornan and Emily Blunt.
Yeah.
Um, and you need a little bit more, I would say, local color. I'm thinking of movies like Waking Ned Divine, which was a feel good movie that came out when I was a kid that took place in Ireland. But I think there's something you can do on stage where it doesn't need all the bells and whistles because you've got the energy of a live crowd. It can be a little bit simpler and still be excellent and profound, but the same script or a similar script comes off as twee and nonsensical as opposed to whimsical and sweet, which is, I think, the way people received it on Broadway. So I just find it fascinating that this was critically acclaimed and it just couldn't translate to the screen. But there is still a lot of the same DNA that made it a hit play. Like it is a cute story, if a little bit kooky at times.
No, you're absolutely right, because I mean it's a little bit insane, but you can't deny the charm of this film. And I mean, at least from my perspective, I think this it really comes through with Emily and Jamie, who just, like you say, this is a two-hander, but they play off each other so well. And it's one of those things where even when the material is a little bit silly, it's kind of fun to see two actors really kind of throwing themselves into the material like they did here. Like they were both fully invested to sort of have the dueling back and forth like throughout the film, which to me was incredibly entertaining.
I mean, the ending is a little bit odd, and I'm wondering if, because I haven't seen the stage version, I'm wondering if it reads differently on stage. You find out that he identifies as a bee and she identifies as a swan, on a pretty profound level. Like they really do identify with those animals, but the movie doesn't really go into the implications of that, and it doesn't really treat them like they are otherkin, which is another thing that I feel like now that we've talked a little bit more about what it is to be otherkin. I mean, we saw on Glow a really, I would say, a pretty progressive representation of a person who identifies as a wolf. It That part felt a little bit underdeveloped to me,
Yeah,
frankly.
no, the third act of the sort of the revelation of sort of him being a bee and her being this one did almost play like a clunky punchline. As much as you're still kind of charmed by it, it was like you could feel the balloon deflating as they sort of let that reveal come out.
Also, he doesn't do anything bee-like besides the fact that he sees bees at some points. There's nothing about his personality where you're like, that guy's a bee. Like you can tell, like, he's not constantly doing things. He's not super busy. He doesn't have the characteristics I would associate with a bee. So that kind of character development, I felt there was a failure there. I felt like that was a missed opportunity, unless I'm just reading this incorrectly and maybe he has a whole host of bee characteristics that I just didn't pick up on.
No, I mean, I don't think you're wrong, but I mean, I would say Shanley tried to give this a bit of a sort of socially awkward fish out of water kind of vibe. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
especially if you look at some of the other stuff he's done, like there's a lot of beats here that are kind of similar to what happened in something like Joe versus the Volcano, which
Mm-hmm.
had like this awkward love story going on
Yeah.
in it. And
Mm-hmm.
it's he's definitely sort of trying to find sort of romance in very sort of socially awkward situations. I think that seems to be one of the things he seems to be drawn to, especially as a filmmaker. Because I mean, he's written a bunch, but he's only directed 3 films.
Yeah, I find it very sweet that he wants to deal with two awkward people in their 30s and tell their love story. These are people who you don't fully understand why she's in love with him, but you are rooting for them because they are very likable screen presences. I mean, Emily Blunt is, I would say, one of the most likable actors of her generation. And Jamie Dornan, I think, is becoming really interesting. Since 50 Shades of Grey, which, I mean, notoriously he didn't really like being a part of that project, but since then he's really leaned in to doing entertainment kind of that's geared towards women. He's sort of similar to Chris Pine in that sense. Like he did Barb and Star Go to Vista Del Mar, right, where
Yeah.
he plays the
Oh, he
male
was
lead
fantastic in
role.
that. Yeah.
He's so good in that. And he's happy to just sort of like laugh at himself and also play like a handsome dummy. Um, Kind of in a Chris Pine way. Like Chris Pine also is okay to sort of recede in the background and make all these projects that are made essentially for a female audience. Like I don't want to stereotype. If there are men who like these things, that's great, but you know that the execs who greenlight these things are trying to appeal to female audiences when they
For
do.
sure. For sure.
Yeah. So I think he's interesting, his career choices. And he also, like, if you look at his IMDb page, he has range. Like The Fall, where he plays a
Yeah.
serial killer, that's also something. I mean, Gillian Anderson plays a fantastic feminist detective there. Um, Her performance does veer a bit into propaganda, but I love Gillian Anderson, so I'll give it a bit of a pass. But I mean, that was clearly made for women. There are lots of feminist monologues in that text. So while whether he's doing comedy or he's doing like a serial killer drama, what I think is interesting about him is he's not in a lot of projects that are made with male viewers in mind. Like he's not courting, he's like actively courting the female gaze, to use a term that, I mean, I know that the female gaze is not really an academic film term, but it is a term in pop culture that we
No,
use
for sure. For
collectively.
sure.
And I think that is cool. I find him a very compelling screen presence, and I like the fact that he doesn't care about making movies that would impress men. As a feminist, that's interesting to me. I am.
No, you're absolutely right. And I mean, I was so struck, especially by watching this film, just the three basic leads in the film, or the three recognizable faces, are three actors who are really sort of going out of their way to find sort of different and more interesting material. Because I mean, you look at Emily, who's basically not afraid to do anything. I mean, this is an Irish production. None of them got paid to do this movie. You look at Jamie, then you look at Chris Walken, who is fearless. I mean, he did something like Percy, which is basically a Canadian movie, and he's done so many other stuff. And I mean, even John Hamm, who I kind of hate, is still perfectly cast in this film as just being sort of the vacuous pretty boy American.
Yeah. Yeah, and he loves playing douchebags. Like, he leans into it so hard. This is kind of an echo of his character in Bridesmaids, where it's like a really one-note character, and you're just supposed to laugh at him for being superficial and kind of a dick. And it's the same here. Although he does get a happy ending. Like, he meets a nice Irish girl on a flight. They have a meet cute. So it's a film that has a tremendous amount of affection for all of its characters. Like, in some ways, a lesser story would just completely vilify him, and then his consequence would be just being ghosted by Emily Blunt, and we don't care about him anymore. But the film does wrap his story up too.
Well, and it's one of those things, because this is such a goofily endearing story that if you had had lesser actors in any of the roles, it wouldn't have worked nearly as well. It's one of those things where I really felt like everyone kind of got the tone of the material.
Yeah.
And what the story they were trying to tell. Because I mean, to me, this almost played like a fable.
It is a fable, in my opinion. And I think that we in this world, like, we're now in the era, I think we're exiting it, but this is the tail end of the era of like gritty filmmaking. Everything has to be gritty, right? And when the play came out, I don't think we'd reached peak grittiness. Also, plays in general are allowed to be a little bit more whimsical than films. And it reminded me of fables like Penelope, which starred Christina Ricci, came out, I mean, I think about 15 years ago, or Ella Enchanted, which is a great children's movie that I saw as a teenager and loved, even though it was for younger children. But I think that there's something to be said for fables, right? Where everything is supposed to be symbolic. It's a metaphor. You're not supposed to take it literally. It's supposed to be sentimental. It's supposed to be twee. It's supposed to make you happy, and teach you a fairly simple moral, because fables are written, they're didactic, right? And the moral here essentially is like, love conquers all, right? Be vulnerable, express your true self, because you might actually be missing out on your soulmate. When Jamie Dornan tells Emily Blunt, I'm a bee, she gets to reply, I'm a swan. And then they realize they really are actually perfect for each other. Her suspicion was right. So it is this fable in praise of vulnerability and how that allows us to find love. But I think for whatever reason, critics and audiences, because this was panned, and not just the film, the trailer was panned. Like, there were parodies of this trailer. People were mocking it. And I participated in that because it was kind of funny to mock this story. But it's not, if you're going to judge it by the standards of the genre of a fable, you can't say I want it to be realistic and gritty, and like, I don't think that this is realistic, that both these people would live at home on this farm in their 30s, like, and I don't think it's realistic that Emily Blunt would be obsessed with this guy, she'd meet someone else. Like, all of those things are valid criticisms if the movie wants to be a work of realism, but it doesn't.
Yeah. No, and I mean, that's one of those things where, I mean, I remember when the marketing for this film came out, and it felt very different. But when I sat down and I watched it, I mean, I was genuinely charmed by it. But it is like you say, it's twee, it's silly, it's pretty well nonsense. But if you buy into that, that's where the reward comes. And I mean, I think that's why this is one of those movies that people ultimately miss. And I mean, I guess maybe just to start putting a bow on all this, I'm kind of curious, from your perspective, what is it about this film that you think audiences should want to connect to it with it? Because for me, I think it's just sort of that endearing sort of warmth that you get that smile you get when you're watching it, and sort of it's that unexpected sort of warmth and smile that you're surprised by something. You're delighted and you enjoy something. It's not serious. It's not sort of emotionally relevant. It's all pretty well nonsense, but it's
Mhm.
delightful nonsense.
Mhm. I think that there are very few charming, delightful movies made nowadays with good production values, where the cinematography is well done and the script is well written, and there are actors of a very high caliber. Uh, when people want something comforting and charming, they often now watch Hallmark movies. And I'm not trying to deride Hallmark movies. There is a time and a place, but in many ways, I think Hallmark movies become so popular because Hollywood has turned its nose up at anything sweet. I mean, even the romantic comedies that are coming out today very rarely end with like an actual romantic pairing. The moral is always like, I need to go and work on myself. And that's a fine moral. And I love lots of movies like that. Like, I'm a big fan of Lola Versus. I'm a big fan of that particular subgenre within romantic comedies. But I think that we need a variety of movies. And sometimes when you've had a bad day, it's nice to go home and watch something that has this adorable worldview, right? This love story that just makes you warm on the inside, especially right now. We live in an era where I don't think you could say there's such a thing as too much comfort watching, right? Like, we need it. And what I like about this is it kind of gives you the same feeling a Hallmark movie would, but you get to watch amazing actors, you get well written, thoughtful dialogue, and you get stunning cinematography and a gorgeous location. I mean, Ireland is just such an idyllic place. So I think that this is the kind of movie I wish they'd make more of, and they don't because we mock these movies when they get greenlit. um, but I wish that we didn't feel like, as a society, we had to perform coolness by pretending we hate happy things. Because then what happens is no one invests money in happy things, and instead you have to watch the low budget things Netflix puts out at the holidays if you want to feel good inside, right? Like, we love to mock Netflix movies like The Holiday because Netflix pours no money into them and films them in like 2 weeks. But the reason is because they know these movies get mocked. They know they don't get respected. So Netflix, in many ways, has brilliantly just decided, we know you want to watch them, but we know you don't want to tell people you want to watch them. So we're just going to do the cheapest version possible. Whereas Wild Mountain Thyme dared to actually do like a high quality version of that. And then the thanks was people just making fun of them.
This almost feels like art house Hallmark to me. Just it's one of like it's all like it's an offshoot of something that's incredibly well produced and well acted and well written, but it makes you feel warm inside, which really art house is not supposed to make you want to feel, but it does.
But I think that that's an edgy choice because we have such a proliferation of movies that have ambiguous endings. You're
Yeah.
not sure what it means, that have upsetting endings. There's so much tragedy. We have a lot of torture porn, all of those problems. Like, and there's a time and a place for upsetting movies as long as they aren't exploiting people. But I almost feel like this is the edgier choice, but society doesn't recognize that yet. Like, it's daring to make something that essentially has a worldview that isn't super bleak, right? That says, you know what, there's beauty in the world. That's a daring choice in 2021.
Being goofy and darling is now creatively ambitious. I didn't think we'd ever see the day. But on that note, I think it's a good time to wrap it up. And I just want to say thank you again, Sarah, for coming on. And just to remind everyone, if you need something goofy and a little bit endearing that's incredibly well acted and well shot, with go watch Wild Mountain Thyme on Amazon Prime now from our friends at Elevation Pictures. And it's again, it's one of those movies that it'll surprise you. Just turn it on and let it sort of wash over you, and you'll really enjoy it.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Dave.
Well, thanks again for coming on, Sarah. And don't forget to visit our friends over at Bay Street Video for all your DVD, Blu-ray rental, or purchasing needs this summer, as they are still open for curbside and some mailing delivery as well. Over at 1172 Bay Street, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, you can give them a call at 416-964-9088. That's 416-964-9088. Or send them an email at baystreetvideoto@gmail.com for any of your DVD and Blu-ray needs.